Hello and welcome to Property Question Time. I'm Stephen Galpin and this is the show where we're going to be answering our viewers' property related questions. And we're coming to you today from our studio in Canary Wharf, London. And joining me today to answer those questions is Ben Stroud, co-founder of Grange London, West London estate agency. Welcome, Ben.
Thank you, Stephen.
Good to have you back. And joining Ben for the first time is Frazer Campbell, co-founder of Brickflow, property finance specialist. Welcome, Frazer.
Thanks for having me.
Ben, you're going first, and the first question is this. Property prices are dropping and will possibly fall further in anticipation of a budget that may target the property market. Is this the experts' view, and are they expecting a strong recovery post-budget?
I think if you look at the stats, you look at what's going on at the moment in the country, most people agree that in London, prices are at best static, but have dropped slightly marginally in the last year to date. In the regions, not slightly more rosy, but most stats are 3 to 6 months in the rearview mirror. So what we're seeing right now, the coalface, if you like, is a real lack of activity. And I would dare say when the stats come out for Q3 and Q4 this year, you're seeing a drop all over the country, but especially in London. I think where the different parts of the country will diverge after the autumn budget, I think you'll see the regions not necessarily bounce back, but I think they'll hold firm. Everyone's on pause at the moment to see what comes out, but early indications suggest that the government's, some of their new plans and some of their new taxes on property are targeting properties of £500,000 or over, which is almost exclusively, well, not exclusively, a lot of those are in the southeast and London. So I think London will stay reasonably depressed for another year. I think the regions will be solid.
That's a very detailed answer, Ben. Have you got a crystal ball there or something?
I do actually. Yeah, just another table.
I thought you might have. Ben, I'm reading in the press and I'm seeing here in Canary Wharf in particular, although I know you're the other side of London, but I mean, we're seeing drops here of 25–30% on some of the values from 5 years ago.
Yeah, I think in some cases that's a new build thing. I think where you've got buildings which historically, have a lot of amenity provision, so gyms, virtual golf driving ranges, you name it, that's driven the service charges up alongside energy costs of labour. And that just means they're less desirable. So I think some of those buildings have taken a real hit. If you're looking at period buildings in where I am in West London, for example, flats in mansion blocks, houses which have lower running costs, I would say those drops aren't quite as big.
I mean, at one time, the mansion blocks were considered to be very expensive service charges because they required maintenance through age. And of course, all the new build stuff required nothing for so many years, but then reality hits, doesn't it?
Yeah, they've caught up.
Okay. Frazer, do you find that service charges and values are a real issue in private mortgages these days?
They can be, for sure. I mean, it's the kind of cost that starts off, as you say, reasonably inoffensive or non-existent and quickly scales into, a multiple of thousands of pounds a year. Yeah. And that hits your affordability, right? Lenders would look at it.
Yeah. And I do think the practice of developers who, shall we say, subsidise the service charge for the first 2 or 3 years to hit their sales, it's not a good practice, is it? And especially if you've got young people buying who suddenly wake up 3 years later with a service charge that's doubled or trebled. It's quite a thing. You must see that in the West End where you are in particular.
Look, it's there are rumours, but who knows whether that's a thing. But I certainly do see, we don't see many new starts of new developments now, but the ones that are coming up, and I talk to developers, that's my job, they are shrinking their amenity provision. They're realizing that people they certainly don't want the cost, and they don't necessarily want spas and jacuzzis, and they just want a great place to work from home, good co-working, good coffee. That's about it, really.
I mean, it's changed, hasn't it? I mean, when we were working down here together, I mean, you'd go out to Asia Pacific areas, you'd get pre-sales on everything that you're doing. If you hadn't got a gym, swimming pool, cinema and whatever else,
Yeah.
you'd be selling nothing. But now, thank heavens, I think we're seeing just basic building going on, and I think that's good news, isn't
I
it?
think it's what we need.
I think it is what we need. Okay, thank you, Ben. Fraser, your first question. I want to purchase at auction a small portfolio of buy-to-let properties, as prices currently indicate it's a buyer's market. How would I go about setting up finance for such a purchase when I'm until I'm the successful bidder on one or two or three of the lots that I'm looking at? I can't give the funder full details. How do I go about this?
So yeah, the simple things to do right at the front end would be have your own, you know, due diligence ducks in a row. So that's the borrowing entity. You as a borrower have, you know, anything the lender would request ready to go at the front. It's simple things, but that will give you a lot of time back later on.
Would you get that from the auctioneer's packs on the individual lots?
Auctioneer's packs would help, yeah, and then there's your, you know, your own personal information for you as a borrower, which would help. I think if you know as well the region in which you're intending to buy, you might not know the exact street, but a lender will be able to give you indicative terms off the concept of what you're trying to do. So if it's a bridging loan to go in as an acquisition, you know, the lender will know what postcode you're in, what area, and be able to give you some pricing.
Okay. I mean, just from a very practical point of view, and I just want to keep this sort of fairly basic for our viewers so they get a clear understanding. Quite often a broker or a lender will charge an arrangement fee. I think the first question is, at what point is that arrangement fee levied, if you like? But also, if you do go and say, look, I'm looking at this portfolio, this one and this one, they're all in an auction, I hope I get one of them. What's the fee situation on that? Will a lender look at all three without charging you the earth first, or?
Often they will, yeah, and you know, this would be a good point to advocate the broker or to engage a broker to help you navigate that market and that dynamic. The fees generally on a bridging loan are only ever paid once the loan is drawn, and that fee is typically deducted from the loan. So it's not a, you know, unlike paying legal fees where the money leaves your account and the borrower's paying it, typically the lender and the broker fees are structured into the facility. And it goes into the cost of the deal. So those fees are paid on draw.
Are you finding that you're getting a lot of applications for purchase of already formed portfolios? I mean, I see a lot of buy-to-let, smaller buy-to-let landlords coming out of the market. They're saying, no, it's too difficult to make a living, margins are too tight, I'm getting so much hassle from my tenants, I don't know about the new legislation and sort of Renters Reform Act. Much happening there?
There's definitely a supply of buy-to-lets hitting the market. You know, those landlords who were levered at 60, 70, maybe even 75% the last few years are struggling. The re-gear on those mortgages makes the economics quite tricky. The opportunity some of them see is that you convert what you have into HMOs, you try and add more rooms, you improve the yield that way. Or if they have a longer term view that, you know, buy-to-let as a concept here to stay, they're out acquiring because it's a buyer's market. So yeah, interesting dynamic.
But the government have made it very clear that they prefer the bigger landlord, the institution. I presume that's for two reasons. One, collecting tax is easier, and number two, it's probably, it might or might not be the right idea, but the presumption is that the standards will be better if an institution is the landlord. But I'm not sure that altogether works. Are you, Ben?
I think some HAs have had some quite bad press about, and local authorities about, the state of their rental portfolios not being properly managed. I think there's a misconception that private, you know, sort of average guy and girl on the street landlords are, you know, somehow not doing a great job. You know, we manage well over 100 properties, and you know, our landlords are great, and they tick all the boxes in terms of compliance. They do everything that's required, and I think they're being unfairly vilified, really.
I think you're right. I think the private landlord, in general, is very caring about their property and their tenants. So, you know, from both points of view, from a lender's point of view, both need to be cared for, don't they? You know, the security of income, and also the importance to those smaller landlords is prevalent, because they've probably purchased 2 or 3 properties to supplement a pension, perhaps, or something like that. Although you can't have the property itself as a pension, there's nothing to stop you having a portfolio to supplement your pension, and I think that's quite a sort of admirable sort of theory to follow, really.
And I think, just going back to what you were saying, I think there will be an inflection point. At the moment, for the most part, the numbers don't stack up for buy-to-let landlords. But I think there'll be an inflection point where, we're seeing prices drop, and rents are holding firm. And I think there's a long-term structural trend towards renting, because people are finding it harder to buy. So there'll be a point at which it makes sense and the numbers stack up. And I think we might get there quite soon. So that's the ray of light, notwithstanding any more government tinkering with tax.
Yes.
But
I'm never sure that government tinkering works, really. I'm never sure that they ask the right people. I mean, quite often they'll go and ask for an institution's sort of opinion of the market, but they really ought to be talking to people like you or Frazer, who are on the ground, actually either lending the money or selling the property. That's where the real information comes from, isn't it? And I think sometimes we're a bit misguided about where we get our guidance from.
Yeah,
but there we are. Okay, well, that's all we've got time for in this half of the show. So join me again after the break, when I'll be asking Frazer and Ben more of your questions. Hello and welcome back to part 2 of Property Question Time. I'm Stephen Galpin and I'm joined by Ben Stroud and Frazer Campbell. So Ben, your second question. Do the panel think that the abolition of stamp duty and the replacement annual property tax would be a good move forward?
I think stamp duty as a concept is broken. I don't think it's working in its current form, for a couple of reasons. I think that it's too complex. When our own Secretary of State for Housing can't work out, or can't find people to work out, her own stamp duty liability correctly, then the rest of us don't really stand a chance. So that says it all for me. I think it's too complicated. I think it's too expensive, and it's clogging up the housing system. People can't move. Country where people can't move freely isn't a productive country. I think that we need to change stamp duty at the very least, reduce it, simplify it. I don't believe that, and we haven't seen all of the details yet, but I don't believe a yearly tax is the way to go either. I think altering stamp duty is a better bet. Problem I have with a yearly charge is it unfairly penalises people who have money in their property but don't have cash. And what do you do if you can't afford to pay your yearly tax? You lose your job. What happens? Is your house repossessed? I don't know how that works. I think you're much better off having the certainty of knowing you have stamp duty to pay, ring fencing that money, accounting for it up front, and getting it paid, even if they let you defer it for 2 years, 3 years. That makes more sense to me than having to pay 0.5% to 1% of the property value in perpetuity.
I do just wonder, I've said for a long time that I think stamp duty ought to be paid by the seller rather than the purchaser. And although you hear screams of, well, I've already paid it, that wouldn't be fair. No, it's very easy. If you've already paid stamp duty, you deduct that from the balance of the stamp duty due on your sale. But I think I'm right, Frazer, to say that stamp duty is something that's not fundable. It's not lendable, is it? So
no, correct. Yeah, I mean, there's a few structures that exist in in that new build environment where the developer might cut a deal to say, look, we'll pay the stamp duty on your behalf to get the sales going. But no, it's not a lendable fee in normal circles. And the sort of halt that stamp brings to the market is a real shame. To your point, there's no liquidity really in that resi sales space at the moment, and the market desperately needs it. And I think stamp probably has to stay in some form or other, but it needs to significantly reduce. And I'd agree with you that the seller pays it so it doesn't put the brakes on the buyer's appetite.
Yes, I think it's quite a strong factor. I mean, young people, I've mentioned this on the show before, we've been discussing in the office here, let's say £500,000 for a small one-bedroom or studio flat, which is not out of the way in London. By the time you've got to put your 20-25% deposit, you've got legal fees, you've got stamp duty, you need well in excess of £100,000 to even get on that ladder to buy even the most modest London property. It's just unaffordable, isn't it? I mean, I don't know what your earning capacity would have to be to save that up, perhaps while you're renting as well. It's very, very difficult.
Very, very difficult, and this is why, you know, largely the millennial generation is leaning into bank of mum and dad, and that creates a bigger disconnect because not everyone has bank of mum and dad who can help, you know.
Well, the problem for mum and dad is that when it comes to pension time, they're going to be short of cash because they've lent it to the kids. Yeah, and even if they've got a bit of equity in the property they've helped buy, it doesn't really help you live, does it?
No, correct.
I mean, just a question on this point for both of you. You just brought up then quite an interesting point that developers will sometimes pay the stamp duty or whatever. Do we think that developers themselves do enough to create markets as opposed to just waiting for the government to come up with another Help to Buy scheme?
I think they're slightly snookered, and I'm saying this without any kind of bias. I'm not a developer, I'm an agent, but I think it's hard for them. Yeah, they've got no power, and there's two ways to get a market moving. One is to artificially stimulate demand, which the government can pull some levers to do. The other one is to you know, turn on the supply taps, and developers can't really do either. A lot of people say, well, you can because you're sitting on land, you're land banking. It's not that easy because the system doesn't work at the moment. The planning system's really clunky and slow. Government, I think, has the power to do that, and so really, yeah, in my mind, developers are a little bit snookered. I think it's more a government piece. Yeah.
I think. What do you think, Fraser?
I think look, developers get a little bit of unfair press around their appetite to build. To your point, they would rather be building as often as possible, as quickly as possible, on sites that they've got ready to go. But the planning is a huge problem. I think the liquidity they want to provide to the borrower once things are built, that is a high intent kind of stance that they have, right? They live and breathe on sales. Remember, developers only earn money at the back once things are built and sold.
And even then, most of your profits in the last 20 apartments that you're
correct
in the block.
Yeah. And everyone else on that deal chain, you know, the government doesn't make money on this stuff. The lender makes money at the front. The contractor makes money during the way through. You know, people forget the developer isn't being paid till the very, very end. And that creates a big squeeze for them. So I think generally they're very well intentioned, and the government could certainly make life a bit easier for them.
The only problem with that, I mean, there is a school of thought that says that the last Help to Buy scheme did more for developers than it did for purchasers. What's your view on that?
I agree. I think that it made the CEOs and C-suite execs of FTSE 100 house builders very, very rich. They got very big bonuses. And I think a lot of people that bought on Help to Buy find themselves in negative equity, and with government loans, it was 5% deposit. You had to come up with the 20% gap you bridge in between your deposit and getting a mortgage is a loan from the government, and those loans are going up. I think it hasn't worked for buyers, but it's just made a few people richer.
My view too. I've recently bought a 6-bedroom house which I intend to convert into an HMO. Am I better off seeking a bridging loan for the duration of the works and then converting to long-term finance, or should I go for long-term finance from day one?
So there's a couple of ways that you could view this. The fact that property sat there in cash and unencumbered is a really luxurious space to be. So the lending market prices refurb bridging loans quite aggressively. So refurb bridge is a really good option for that. You take a loan, you carry out the works, and you refinance to a term offering at the back end. Where there's really agile products to service that demand is something that's called a bridge to let, or bridge to commercial. So you'll get a refurb bridging loan at the front, you'll carry out the works. As soon as the works are finished, that rolls onto a term debt offering for 12 or 18 months. And then you kick in some tenants, you service that debt, and it's kind of a stabilization period at the back end. So in the current offering from lots of lenders, it's not necessarily bridge or term. You could do both.
Okay.
And there's generally a view from borrowers that interest rates are trending downwards. So that type of facility gives you some room at the back end to maybe let that happen and get a better term offering.
Are you describing a change in the market there? Because we've had this question once or twice before in the past. Bridges have been very reticent to say, well, okay, when the bridge finishes, we're not interested in the long-term finance sector of this. So, you're going to have to go elsewhere, even though you've behaved properly and you've done exactly what you said, you must go elsewhere. Is that changing now? Are those bridges starting to say, well, hold on a minute, we're missing a trick here, I suppose?
Absolutely, yeah. And particularly in the bridging lending space, if you go a layer back from the frontline lending organization, there's a handful of wholesale capital providers that fund the bridging lenders. And what you've seen is the appetite change at that level, who they're happy to offer term debt products, and that feeds into the bridging lender, and all of a sudden you've now got the attitude of why would we get rid of this asset? Let's keep it. It might not be as attractive on the balance sheet as a bridging loan, but we've got a loan, we've got a good asset and a good borrower. Let's keep hold of it. And it's competitive. There's lots of lenders competing over fewer deals, right?
We're almost getting back to brand loyalty, aren't we?
Yeah.
Almost.
Yeah.
I mean, yes. I mean, that's always a sort of touchy subject. I mean, you often get disappointed because perhaps your relationship with a bank or a financier doesn't carry on, and you wonder why, because you've been so good with them and they've been good with you, and it seems such a waste when you have to break that bond, really. But no, I think that's good news. And of course, from the borrower's point of view, I suppose that would be more cost effective on the fee side of things as well, because rather than having two very clear sets of fees to pay, so bridging and then long term, perhaps that can be spread in and
Absolutely, yeah. And lenders are very good. That's a powerful hook for them to retain the borrower.
Yeah.
You spend a lot of money to acquire that borrower through marketing, through personnel, through sales and origination efforts. So to keep hold of it is really important.
Yeah. I think that's good news for the market. I think I do think relationships are important, and as we've discussed earlier, even a relationship with your broker can be super valuable, can't it? Because they really can put you in the right sort of place. Do you agree with that, Ben?
Yeah, and it makes sense. I'm not a loan specialist at all, but it makes sense what you just said, to have, if I was a lender, the high risk part is the bridging element of the loan. When you're refurbing an asset, once it's refurbished, you can go back and assess if it's done the right job, the value stabilized and increased. Why wouldn't you continue, albeit lower interest, but that reflects the fact it's safer. And so, yeah, it makes complete sense.
Yeah.
Thank you both very much indeed for coming in today. That's Ben Stroud, co-founder of Grange London. Thank you, Ben.
Thank you, Stephen.
And Frazer, hope you got through your first programme well with us, and you're not too stressed out with it all. So Frazer Campbell, co-founder of Brickflow, thank you very much for coming in.
Thank you.
I'm Stephen Galpin. Join us again next time on Property Question Time.